Hi, and welcome. The UX Landscape, Present and Future is brought to you by Radiant. This will be a 30-minute event. My name is Josh DuPont, and I'm a marketing manager at Radiant, and I'll be your host today. I'd like to thank our audience for taking the time out of their day, and of course, to our guest speakers. We have a lot of exciting conversation ahead, so let's get moving. Let's do a brief rundown on today's agenda. We'll start with an introduction of our guest, Lam Huynh and Matt Gessler. Then we'll jump right into the fireside chat, followed by a live Q&A with the audience. If you'd like to participate in the Q&A, just please submit a question or comment in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as time allows. All right, let's go ahead and get moving. So Lam Huynh is Radiant's UX design manager. He's a design leader, product designer, and experienced strategist with over 18 years of experience in customer and enterprise UX. Matt Gessler is Radiant's director of digital experience. He's a user experience leader with over 20 years of experience practicing executive level UX strategy, user experience management, and design. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Matt.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you to all those in attendance. I'm really excited to see so many people here and interested in a conversation about UX. And thank you, Lam, for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. So with that, Lam, between the two of us, we have over 40 years experience within UX. And I know we've seen a lot of evolution throughout our careers, but I think really specifically over the last 2 years, there's been quite a few changes and evolution, in our field. Can you speak to what's happened recently?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I wanted to thank you and Josh for having me. Excited to be part of the fireside chat. And hopefully we'll have more of these going forward. So back to your question, Matt, absolutely, there are a lot of exciting trends happening in UX. And one of the things I'm most excited about is the rise of real-time collaboration tools, right? You have Figma, and you've got XD and Sketch is trying to play catch up now. Let's go like way back in the day when all we had was Photoshop, right?
I'll go back even further when we were doing video.
Yeah, could you imagine how we would be able to work remotely, especially with using those types of old school? I mean, Photoshop is still relevant, but definitely not around UX, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, really, that's been a really great positive trend. And so, moving from that sketch where you're working on your hard drive to now working in the cloud with everyone else jumping in, it comes with some of its, there's some definitely some drawbacks, right? Working in those real-time collaboration tools, but I think for the most part, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives there.
So what are the positives of that time, that real-time collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having the ability to really jump on and being able to work in the same exact artboard as your teammates and being able to, you work on this part and I work on that part and I can go in, it just makes things so much faster, and there's no syncing, right? I mean, you don't have to have multiple copies of everything. And oh, I'm working in that file. You don't touch that file. Like everything is so much faster. You add those tools like Figma has introduced the voice chat. So within Figma, you could have voice chat with your collaborators. And what's really cool but creepy also is like they also now have the caption, the auto caption, which captures your conversation for for reference at a later time. So which I think is really interesting. Haven't really got a chance to use that a whole lot, but I think that ability to connect in any way, whether it's making comments, right, or whether there's a little fun cursor chat where you can kind of get the attention of the other collaborators, and they can follow your cursor around on the screen. Really fun, innovative things that I think at the end of the day is just expanding and it's making the collaboration effort amongst especially distributed teams much faster, much easier, more efficient.
Well, and I think the important thing there is you mentioned distributed teams. And for all intents and purposes, I think right now the vast majority of design teams are distributed, right? As we move from a pandemic into an endemic, I think really that is the new norm. And any technology that can help better that experience is welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is becoming the norm for remote work. Even though, there are some outliers here and there, but you're also, that collaboration goes across time zones, right? And
yes.
So yeah, that ability to be able to work anywhere, anytime, right, without having to deal with large load times, and everything is natively cloud. It's been a huge blessing.
Absolutely. All right, Josh, I think let's move on to the next one. So this is a great topic, and I know, Lam, you and I have discussed this a bunch, throughout our working relationship, but getting into role specialization. So as the field begins to mature, right, how have the roles and job responsibilities changed to adapt to market needs, right? So I know when you and I started in this profession, there were no specialists, so to speak, right? You were that Sherpa who saw everything through from conception to completion. Yeah. But now, there's been a distinct transition into more specialized role where you might have a UX designer or UX researcher, an interaction designer, a visual designer. Speak to me about how you've seen, these changes, and what are the pros and cons there.
Well, again, another trip down memory lane, right? So back in the day, people were, you're a webmaster, right? Web designer. It was so generic. And I think back then, everyone expected you to code as well. Like, you had to have PHP and JavaScript experience, and then you had to do UI design. And, I don't think even research was even part of the conversation back then, much less UX. So everyone really was this generalist, like if you did software, you had to do all those things, and you had to maintain your web server. You had, all those fun old school things. So as, the industry and profession has matured, we're beginning to see with any other profession, you start to see really, specialized roles. So to the point where, now people are looking for designers who have specific industry experience. You got your fintechs and your DeFis and your SaaSes, right? And all the acronyms and abbreviations you could throw at it, one enterprise design experience. So it gets very into the minutia of the job specialization. You even have some people are being hired just to manage DesignOps or just to manage the design library. Now that is their full-time job. So I think that's very interesting. And I kind of liken it to where, you have back in the day, you had your GP who took care of you and the family, and, to perform your checkups, but you wouldn't necessarily want to go to them to, perform brain surgery, right? So the specialization, definitely just helps to, mitigate risk. They know exactly, they have the exact skill set that you're looking for, and, improve task proficiency. You have software specialization, especially with, the software. I think there's trends just change in the blink of an eye, where one day Sketch was king, and now Figma's ruling the roost. Who knows what's next?
So you mentioned risk mitigation. Isn't there an inherent risk though with specialized roles in almost a game of telephone, like in any things getting lost in translation as you pass off from specialist to specialist, or is that a overblown concern?
Yeah, I think it's an overblown concern. No, I would say that being well-rounded and being knowledgeable in many aspects of your profession helps out. Like, to be able to understand, if you're working with developers, right, to be able to understand the basic, premises and foundations behind good coding and what's possible, what's not possible, that's gonna definitely help you with your design, right? But you do not absolutely not have to have coded an entire application to be a good designer, but you should be aware of what the limitations might be and how all of these other technologies intersect with your role. And over time, with experience, you start to gain that insight. But I'd say, it also has lowered the barrier to entry, right? You didn't have to learn so many different skills just to get your first job. So now you can.
I think that's a really great point, because previously you had to kind of know everything under the sun. All right, Josh, I think we're good looking at time. Let's move on to the next question. So jumping in now, I think organically we've kind of hit on this a little bit, but getting into DesignOps. So what are some of the emerging trends, especially within larger organizations, that enable design at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what DesignOps is all about, is getting that orchestration and optimization of people, processes, and the craft, right? To design at scale, and how's that done? And I would say that DesignOps is fairly new development within UX, just kind of how DevOps recently developed. I wouldn't say too recent, but it seems that design kind of lags behind development a little bit in terms of how much innovation happens there. But some of the trends now with DesignOps that we're seeing to be a part of projects are design tokens, which basically brings the power of variables, something that developers have had forever, into the design world. So now you can make those atomic level changes and really have that replicated, and it saves a lot of manual work across your different systems and your different and all of the mock-ups that you've created for a specific project. And then the client or whoever decides, hey, I don't want that color, that shade of blue, go update all your mock-ups and change the border radius of the button while you're at it, right? So all of that stuff now could really, with the advent of design tokens, can be managed centrally, and that can be either on your design tool, or that could be hosted in something like GitHub. And
so basically, Lam, I guess what you're saying is changes that previously could take you weeks, months, if not entire year, especially if there was like a brand change, right, can really take days or even less, if
Absolutely.
I'm hearing you correctly, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure.
That's the idea, and that's how you can kind of design at scale. And that's one of the tools in your utility belt. But also we have storybook integration with Figma that basically allows you to almost in real time have components designed, have those components published to a web style guide or component library that developers can then reference and get the right code and go about their merry way. And rather than having to dig through all of your design files, right, it's there for them. So those
is that real-time publishing that you're referring to?
Almost real time, yeah. Once that integration happens and you have your system set up, you can absolutely, much quicker than what it is, how things are currently done today, right? So where you'd have to go and design it, and then you'd have to go into the repository and make updates to that, and and add all the different styles and whatnot. All the styles get automatically populated, and then you just add the snippet of code that the developer might need to reference in order to get that component into their UI. So it's just reducing that time that you're transferring that information between designer to developer.
So it sounds like that I guess you're talking a lot about, say, updates to existing systems, whether it's a design system or an existing
library, yeah.
library. What about creation of new components, or if you're starting fresh? Is there any advantages there, or is this more reducing that maintenance cost, right? Which we know is where really the bulk of your cost is incurred.
Absolutely, it's absolutely reducing your maintenance costs. But if you are adopting the right frameworks, for example, we've adopted the AND framework, which has already inherently built in a component library, and then it becomes just a real simple integration between, and updating whatever updates you happen to make to your out-of-the-box library, publishing those, and now they have the base framework components, which are already well documented. Put that on top of whatever your customizations for your specific project, and you're off and running.
It's great. All right, Josh, let's move on to the next slide, please. So getting into service design, right? So there's a lot of talk about service design. I feel like every time I'm on Medium or any other kind of UX site, there's always an article or a post that is mentioning service design. So from your viewpoint, Lam, what is service design, and how are you seeing it play out within your engagements?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, service design just encompasses everything that we do inside of enterprises and our clients, and it ties it back to how it will eventually improve customer experiences and touch points, that those interfaces with the enterprise. If you can kind of imagine a theater where you have the audience, that's your customer, then you have the stage and its actors, and that's your customer experiences, your products, your touch points, interfaces. And then you've got backstage, all those people's processes, technologies, and systems that help to run the show. Those two pieces together, to me, that's the essence of service design. They're working in concert, something, and that produces the end product that is seamless to the customer. And most customers will never see how the sausage is made, and they never should have to.
Well, but I think that's a really good viewpoint from an enterprise perspective, right? But
Sure.
Let's think about it from a consumer perspective, because I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And the analogy that I usually give our existing clients or prospective clients that we work with here at Radiant Digital is how at least I explain service design is, if I had, say, two coffee shops next door to each other. They sell the exact same coffee at the exact same price. How do you determine which one you go to? It is that service, right? That service design. So how can UX be a differentiator in terms of creating better service in terms of consumer applications?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to come down to where you're going to the counter and you're ordering that coffee, and how you may decide to pay for it. If one, where you don't have a system set up where all they're taking is just cash, and all I have on hand is card, right? And so,
Lam, I don't think I've had cash in my pocket for the last 5 years.
Exactly. If you don't enable those systems and processes to take Bitcoin or whatever the customer might want to pay with right now, that's going to be the differentiator between your business and the coffee shop down the street.
Yeah. So I guess, to paraphrase, right, like UX can really be that enabler to, especially as we look to most organizations working on digital transformation, right, and digital initiatives, is that UX is that differentiator to really catapult your service apart from your competitor.
Yeah, it's an enabler and it's a differentiator for sure. I think most people use Apple as the North Star, right?
Yeah,
Of service design, and absolutely, they rule a roost in regard to that aspect. But and everyone else has kind of taken their lead and running with it. And I think overall, that's going to improve the customer experience across industries and across segments of the market.
absolutely. All right, Josh, I think we move on to the next slide. So we've spent a good amount of time here, Lam, talking about the kind of arc that we're seeing UX go through, what we've seen as like the past and kind of some of these inflection points and the changes that we're coming up on. So that kind of leads us into like what's next in terms of the future of UX. So I think you hit upon a couple of these organically through our conversation.
Yeah.
I mentioned design tokens, but what do you see as the UX landscape of the future? And when I say the future, we can it could be within the next year or two, or if you even want to be more forward looking, what does that mean for the next 5 or 10 years?
Absolutely. So I would say let's look far into the future, 5, 10 years. I'm excited about what AI-driven design might bring to the table, and the speed and scale, at the blink of an eye, being able to churn out some sort of wireframes in a day, high fidelities the next day, tweak those based off of feedback, and I think that's going to be so powerful, and it's going to be a huge differentiator between the companies who adopt that and utilize those technologies to their full potential. And you're going to see a huge payoff on that. And so that's something that, again, I think it's at its infancy. But if I was watching a YouTube video the other day about how Marvel Entertainment, right, has just really taken Hollywood by storm. And one of the things that they've been implemented is this ability to pre-render the entire movie shot for shot in 3D, visualize the whole thing without any actors, and their place, they have camera placement, everything, so they can kind of tweak that virtually. And then they basically just bring on the director to execute on that vision. But a lot of the stuff is pre-planned, and it's saving them so much time and so much money, right? And being able to see how that movie plays out on the animation program, right? So I think that's going to be something that's really similar. It's going to happen with UX design as well, and so that's going to be really interesting to follow and see how that starts to develop. And I think another thing that is kind of a bigger issue is kind of I think we're going to start to grapple more with the ethics dilemma of UX, because you could use it for good and bad. And how with the social dilemma, that Netflix show that talks about how a lot of these apps now are engineered and designed to grab your attention and to
dark patterns, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. So those are going to be really interesting topics to see how they develop, and to see if there's legislation that gets passed about those things that, with the whole Instagram and young teens, and it's damaging their self-image and things of that nature. So I think those things are starting to play out in the future, and see how they really will affect how and why we design things.
That's interesting. That's great. So, Josh, I think with that, we're ready for some Q&A. With only 5 minutes left here.
Yeah, thank you both. That was a really engaging conversation. In the sake of time management, let's go ahead and move on to this live Q&A. So if you have a question or a comment for our guest speakers, please put them in the chat now, and we'll get to as many of them as time allows. Let's see, there's already a couple here in the chat. So I'm going to read off the first one for you. What do you feel the impact of low code, no code solutions will be on the UX field?
This is a good one.
Yeah.
Because we're actually dealing, we're starting to broach that subject matter with some
absolutely.
But Lam, go ahead on. I'd love to hear your perspective.
It's been on the radar, and I think for the short term, we're not going to see a huge impact with low code, no code. You know, and again, that's going to speak to. It doesn't mean that you don't have to design, right? It just means that there's less of a time between ideation to actual execution and deployment, right? And so with that, you still, the fundamentals of UX, right? The empathy and the research and the iterative nature of it is still going to have to come into play. But to be able to get what you design and get it into the hands of customers faster, that's where the impact is going to be.
So it more of a, obviously no substitute for research, right? And understanding. But really it's more I would say a different tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely.
Execution, right? And executing on that understanding.
Yep, that is my take on that.
Yep.
Okay. The next question in the queue is, how will AI and ML impact design teams?
I think that AI and ML will really help to bring that data that AI is able to process to give them suggestions and to just, I think it's going to enhance their ability to move faster. And again, I think it's just speaking to being able to move at scale and design at scale. I think that's the biggest impact. Will it eventually one day replace designers? That I think that remains to be seen. There's always going to be that human touch, that human interface, because that at the end of the day, that's why people are get into these apps, right? So I think that that's just another tool that you can use to be better informed and to iterate quickly.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I look at it as another piece of like the user research data puzzle, right? So you would have your qualitative pieces of interviews, field study, whatever it may be, quantitative, where maybe you're looking at on analytics, surveys like the system usability skill or the technology acceptance model. I think to Lam's point, this is just one other piece of that puzzle that can give you greater insights, or I should say maybe the depth of the insight as well.
Yeah, there's another question here. I think it goes back to the first question, like a follow-up. It says, will low code and no code move UX more to focus on platforms versus specific applications?
Well, I would say, I don't know if it's mutually exclusive, right? Because I think you can have both. Like if you look at Google as like a platform, right, where you have slides, docs, sheets, Gmail, search, right, where you could put together those pieces as part of a greater platform, or be very specialized in only dealing with a singular application. I don't know if it's necessarily one versus the other, but I can see them both moving in parallel. And Lam, I don't.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I don't know if low code, no code will push your design either way, because at the end of the day, you're designing for a specific purpose, and no code, low code is just another tool, right, in your belt that'll allow you to get there quicker. But whether it's going to persuade you to go one way or the other, I think is probably not what is intent.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, like, if I use Sketch, I might go to a platform versus using Figma,
right,
an application, right? At the end of the day, it's just another tool in your toolbox.
Yeah.
All right, let's squeeze one more question in here real quick. When do you think design tokens will become mainstream?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
You know, it is in its infancy. We're using it now in our projects, and you know, with any new technology, it has it's had its stumbling blocks. So I'd say give it another year, and when we start to see design tokens being natively integrated into those design tools, you don't have to have any special plugins or anything like that, and I think you're going to really sort of see that become mainstream and being used throughout the entire industry.
Yeah, you know, Lam, I think you're a little bit more optimistic than I am. I think a year it's going to start getting more traction. If I had to guess, I'd probably be more in even though not that far off, I would say maybe in the 2 to 3 year.
Yeah.
Because I think the way it actually gains momentum is through enterprise clients. And typically, those are the organizations that are sometimes laggards in
Yeah, absolutely.
Being, forward thinking. So, they might be trailing by 3, 4, 5 years in terms of like what a lean startup might be utilizing. So if I had to guess, I'm leaning more towards the 2 to 3 years. Lam is looking at a year.
I am very optimistic about it. That's because I want. That's because I want it there. I want it working now.
Well, I was going to say we can put this on the calendar, and whoever's right, we'll buy lunch. How's that?
Absolutely.
Lam? Okay.
So when are you saying that when it's natively a part of Figma or Sketch or whatnot?
Yeah,
All right.
We'll put it that is the litmus test.
Sounds good.
All righty.
Okay, yeah, those were some good questions. I'd like to thank both of our guest speakers today, Lam and Matt, and of course, everybody in our audience that took time out of their day to spend with us. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website. That's listed on the screen right now. And all right, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.